but my life was just wrapped up in what Kody needed and what he wanted and what the family needed and wanted.
What began as a perfect family dream slowly collapsed under its own weight. And when the world was first introduced to the Browns through the polished lens of a television camera, the images seemed almost impossibly wholesome, almost utopian, as though the doctrine of plural marriage had finally found its most photogenic ambassadors. People whose smiles were so wide and whose convictions so unshakable that one could almost believe. They had uncovered a sacred formula for family happiness that mainstream society had long since abandoned. At the heart of it stood Kody Brown, charismatic, animated, sometimes even boyishly excitable. A man who carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed he had been chosen by God to prove to the world that a family need not be defined by convention, that love was not finite, that one man could truly be husband to multiple women and father to dozens of children without neglecting anyone. And his energy was so persuasive that in the early days, it was easy to mistake his passion for balance, easy to believe that charisma alone could hold together an arrangement that was already fragile by its very nature. Beside him sat his wives Mary, the first, who carried both the dignity and the burden of being the legal spouse. A woman who smiled dutifully for the cameras, but whose eyes betrayed a longing that words rarely captured. Because to be the first wife meant she had once enjoyed exclusivity, intimacy, and the unchallenged attention of Kody, only to see that specialness diluted as the family grew. Janelle, the second, more pragmatic and intellectual. A woman who approached plural marriage less as a romance and more as a structured system. Someone who contributed stability, financial management, and rationality, yet whose emotional detachment became both a shield and a prison. For while she avoided the storms of jealousy by burying herself in work, the avoidance only deepened the distance between her and her husband. Christine III, vibrant, maternal, and endlessly giving. A woman who had entered this arrangement with idealism, believing wholeheartedly in the concept of sisterhood, of women sharing not only a husband but also companionship, chores, and lives bound by faith, yet who also yearned for affirmation, for recognition, for the little gestures of romance that polygamy too often forgets. And though she laughed the loudest, played with children the most joyfully, and carried the role of peacemaker, beneath it all she felt an ache growing year by year, a fear that she was becoming invisible. And then, many years later, came Robin, the fourth and final edition. Younger, softer in demeanor, with a history of her own and children from a previous relationship, whom Kody embraced with fervor. Her entrance bringing with it both a sense of renewal for Kody and a deep fracture for the rest. Because what had once been somewhat evenly balanced was now heavily tilted, and though the cameras at first presented it as a love story, with Kody experiencing the thrill of courting once again and Robin glowing under his attention, the older wives understood instinctively that this shift was not temporary but permanent. That the gravitational pull of Kody's affection had changed direction, leaving them orbiting at the edges, smiling bravely for the viewers, while slowly breaking inside. In those early seasons, the family would sit side by side on couches, rehearsed almost to perfection, speaking of how jealousy was natural but manageable, how their faith taught them to overcome selfishness, how each wife contributed something unique and irreplaceable to the family, how love did not divide but multiplied. And for audiences accustomed to seeing polygamy portrayed as cruel, repressive, or secretive, this openness was intoxicating, almost revolutionary. As though the Browns had been divinely appointed to rehabilitate the image of plural marriage, to show the mainstream world that it could be joyous, functional, and even enviable. Yet if one looked closely, the cracks were already visible. Faint, but undeniable, flickering at the edges like shadows just out of sight. For Mary's silences were too heavy to be dismissed, her forced smiles too brittle, her downcast glances revealing the loneliness of being replaced at the center of her husband's life. And though she spoke of fulfillment, one could sense the yearning in her voice, the quiet plea for Kody's attention, a plea that went largely unanswered. Janelle, though rarely emotional, seemed perpetually busy, retreating into the safety of work, finances, and logistical planning. As if to immerse herself in practicality was easier than confronting the rawness of neglect, as though spreadsheets and schedules could numb the ache of knowing her marriage was transactional rather than romantic. Christine, outwardly cheerful, the self-declared fun mom, already felt the wounds most keenly, though she dared not articulate them too loudly, choosing instead to whisper them in private conversations with friends or bury them beneath relentless positivity, convincing herself that service was her purpose. That if she cooked more meals, organized more birthdays, nurtured more children, perhaps the emptiness in her marriage could be overlooked. Perhaps Kody would notice her again, and yet the more she gave, the less she seemed to receive. The imbalance so striking that even the viewers, years later, would look back at old episodes and see what they had missed in real time, the slow erosion of Christine's joy, the dimming of her light, the invisibility that haunted her. And when Robyn entered, radiant with newness, adored with an intensity that the others had not felt in years, the imbalance grew impossible to ignore, though for a while the cameras framed it as romance reborn, as Kody experiencing the intoxicating thrill of being wanted, of pursuing, of rediscovering the energy of courtship, and Robyn basked in it, becoming the focal point of his world. Her children embraced as his own, her needs prioritized above all, and while the others forced smiles, insisting they were happy for her, inwardly they felt the devastation of being relegated, of being witnesses to their own displacement. Christine bore the heaviest weight, for though her nature was to conceal pain behind laughter, to exaggerate positivity so that no one could accuse her of bitterness. Privately, she confessed to feeling invisible, to realizing that the man who had once promised fairness was no longer even pretending to balance his affections, that his gaze, his time, his energy, all gravitated to Robyn. And though the family publicly spoke of unity, of challenges overcome, of jealousy as a fleeting and manageable flaw, the reality was far darker. The foundation was cracking. Jealousy was not fleeting, but permanent. Sacrifices were not rewarded but taken for granted, and unity was not expanding, but contracting, suffocating beneath the weight of inequality. Yet still, Christine endured. For endurance was her way. She cooked meals, she cared for children. She played the mediator when tensions rose. She laughed the loudest to drown out the silence in her heart. She told herself rebellion was ungodly. That betrayal would dismantle the principles she had built her life upon. And so her rebellion was not loud, but silent. Not spoken, but felt. A rebellion of the heart rather than the tongue. And yet that silence grew louder each year, until even the audience, detached as they were, could sense it. Could feel that beneath the glossy surface of reality television, beneath the smiles and staged family meetings, one woman was quietly reaching her breaking point. One woman who would eventually walk away, shattering not only the illusion of plural bliss, but also the very identity of the Brown family. A departure that would not mark the end, but rather the beginning of a much larger unraveling. A dismantling of ideals once believed untouchable, and the slow, painful collapse of a dream that could no longer bear its own contradictions. For Christine's exit was less an ending than a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the smoldering resentment of the others, exposing truths long buried, forcing into daylight what silence had protected, and showing the world that even the most carefully curated image of harmony cannot withstand the weight of neglect, inequality, and unacknowledged pain.
This is the first time it's ever even come up even in my mind. If Robyn was to get sick, my first reaction would be.
What shattered Christine's heart was not Utah, not the move. Not even the endless upheavals that came with being part of a family always under scrutiny. It was the revelation, sharp and unrelenting, that the man she had once loved so fiercely no longer loved her back, and perhaps, if she dared admit it to herself, had never truly loved her in the way she had needed. But Christine was not the sort of woman to explode in fury or deliver ultimatums with rage. It was never her style. She was the kind who carried storms inside her chest and let them gather silently until the weight became unbearable. And so when she finally asked Kody to sit with her in the yard of their Flagstaff home, it was not with the theatrics of a reality television climax, but with the quiet steadiness of a woman who knew she had reached the end of endurance. The wind rustled through the tall Arizona pines. Their children remained inside, unaware that their world was about to tilt on its axis. And Christine's voice, trembling but firm, finally cut through the years of silence. "I can't do this anymore. I need a relationship where I am seen, where I am heard, where I am loved." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the trees. And then Kody's reply came not with softness or reflection, but with defensiveness sharpened into coldness, his words as rigid as the posture of his body. He insisted that he had tried, that she was disloyal, that she had turned the children against him, that she was the one breaking the family apart. But Christine, though shaken, did not waver. Her eyes met his with the clarity of someone who had already lived the truth in silence for years, and her response was calm, cutting, undeniable. "You quit trying years ago, Kody. I was just the last one to admit it." It was in that moment that the final strands between them snapped, not with a scream, but with a sigh. And when he accused her of being selfish, of giving up on the family, she spoke the words that no amount of spin could erase. "This isn't a family anymore. Not one I know. Not one I want to be in." The devastation was not in the argument, but in its quiet certainty. For Christine, the hardest part was never Kody himself, for his absence had long become a constant shadow in her life. But it was the children, those daughters and sons who had borne witness to her sacrifices, those who had felt the consequences of his neglect most deeply. She thought of Isabel, her beloved daughter who had endured scoliosis surgery without her father by her side, because Kody's obsession with his strict pandemic protocols had kept him away, and the wound from that absence had never healed. When Christine gathered her children to tell them she was leaving, she braced for devastation, but what she found was far more haunting. They were not surprised. The older ones, like Aspen, Michael T., and Peden, offered encouragement, having long watched their mother weep behind closed doors, having heard the muffled sobs when cameras were gone, having witnessed the way she stitched the family together with her laughter while her own heart was breaking. They were proud of her, proud that she had chosen herself at last. The younger children, though, were confused, torn between their loyalty to a father who had been more absent than present and the love they felt for their mother who had never failed them. Christine held them close, reassuring them with words that came from the deepest place of her maternal love. "You're not taking sides, you're taking peace. I will always love your dad, but I can't live like this anymore." And the cameras rolled, documenting every tender and brutal moment. Sight of Christine packing boxes, folding photo albums filled with smiles that now seemed like relics from another lifetime, bubble wrapping ornaments that once symbolized forever but now represented only survival, marking each box carefully, not just for organization but as if she were cataloging the end of an era. The living room walls still echoed with the songs of birthdays, the laughter of children, the cadence of family prayers. But as she packed, it became clear that the heart of the house was leaving with her. The news spread quickly. Sister Wives star Kody Brown exits Kody after 27 years, and it wasn't just a headline, it was a shockwave. Fans who had once judged her for being the less assertive wife now turned their voices into a chorus of admiration, flooding social media with support, calling her brave, calling her an inspiration. Women writing about how Christine's decision emboldened them to leave toxic marriages. How her courage had given them language for their own silent suffering. Christine's exit was not merely a separation, not even merely a divorce, it was a movement. The first seismic crack from within the carefully guarded edifice of polygamy. A declaration from a woman who had once believed in sacrifice above all else, that she deserved more, that love should not mean invisibility, that obedience should not mean erasure. She relocated to Utah, carving out a new home, a new rhythm, a new life. She began prioritizing her health, her laughter, her children's happiness, and her own rediscovered joy. She smiled more, danced more sometimes, even on TikTok, embracing the freedom of being unapologetically herself. She began to date again, to explore the possibility of love untethered from hierarchy or doctrine. And she radiated with a light that had been dimmed for far too long. Meanwhile, Kody unraveled. His grip weakened, his anger intensified. His world shrank as his wives slipped from his orbit one by one, leaving him with only Robin, and even she began to feel the heavy price of being the sole surviving partner in a house built on uneven foundations. Christine, however, did not look back. She did not burn the bridge. She simply walked away, leaving it to collapse under its own contradictions. In her own words, "I gave all I had to a marriage that gave nothing back to me. And at last I understood I wasn't leaving Kody. I was coming back to myself." For years she had kept the peace, held the family together with her own hands, borne the burden of harmony, but at last she chose to hold herself together instead. And if Mary had been the first wife, the symbol of history, and Christine had been the heart, then Janelle was always the spine. She was not loud, not emotional, not one to post cryptic quotes or dissolve into tears on camera. She was the woman of spreadsheets and silent sacrifices. The one who budgeted for 18 children, balanced the chaos of multiple homes, bore the financial and logistical backbone of a sprawling family that consumed everything and gave so little back. For years, Janelle was the reason the Brown family survived at all. Because while others focused on emotional intimacy, on jealousy, on romance, and its absence, she focused on the survival mechanics, ensuring the bills were paid, the investments managed, the cupboards stocked. Kody once complimented her independence, wearing it like a badge of honor for the family's unconventional strength. But what he failed to grasp was that independence was never her choice, was her necessity, born from a marriage in which her husband was absent emotionally and increasingly physically, consumed by Robin and her children, while Janelle retreated into her duties. When Christine walked away, the ground trembled. But when Janelle began to pull back, the entire house of cards quivered. Their conversations with Kody had long been transactional. He spoke little of love, little of intimacy, only of logistics, and even then, only to dismiss or confront. When Janelle raised concerns about money, about the future, about the land at Coyote Pass they had all once dreamed would be their shared utopia, he stonewalled, deflected, or grew combative. She began to see what Christine had already known. He wasn't listening, wasn't even trying. And then came the pandemic, which turned fissures into gaping chasms. Kody's strict, obsessive COVID protocols demanded near total isolation, forbidding visits with adult children, sanitizing groceries, dismantling social lives. And Janelle's sons, Gabe and Garrison, young men with jobs and aspirations, refused to sever themselves entirely just for fleeting hours with a father who demanded loyalty over love. When they resisted, Kody retaliated by cutting off visits altogether. And when Janelle protested, when she reminded him these were his sons, his flesh and blood, his responsibility, he accused her of choosing them over him. And in that accusation lay the truth she had been circling for years. Of course, she would choose her children, 'cause they respected her. They needed her. They still believed in her. The tension exploded in season 17 in a confrontation that stripped away the last pretense, scouting for respect, demanding obedience. blaming her for undermining him, comparing her disloyalty to Robin's supposed devotion. Janelle did not match his shouting. She delivered something colder, stronger, unshakable. I'm not going to apologize for being an independent woman. I'm not going to shrink myself to make you feel powerful. His retort, sharp and wounded, "You don't behave like a wife," fell into the air like a last attempt at dominance, and her reply froze the moment. "Then perhaps I shouldn't be one anymore." That was the end, not in spectacle, but in clarity. The dream of Coyote Pass, the land where they were meant to build homes side by side, had long decayed into farce. Years of shifting plans, broken promises, and manipulation had revealed it. Was never about building houses, but about control. Janelle had even lived in an RV on the property, trying to breathe life into a dream already dead, but Kody had barely shown up. His absence as constant as the wind across the barren acres. Barren acres.
I don't know much about your relationship with Janelle.
Yeah.
Did you just have a rape?
Of all the heartbreaks woven into the fabric of the Brown family story, perhaps the most quietly tragic is that of Mary Brown, a woman whose journey stands apart, not for its dramatic departures or public rebellions, but for its long years of silence, unrecognized loyalty, and the slow, suffocating grief of loving a man who had long since stopped loving her. And unlike Christine's fiery walkout or Janelle's determined break for independence, Mary's path was shaped by quiet endurance, by sacrifices offered without reward, by a hope that clung on far longer than it should, and by a dignity that endured even when her spirit was broken. She was the very first wife, the woman who stood beside Kody when the dream was only an idea, when there were no television cameras, number fame, no controversies, when it was just two people in love, legally married in 1990, building a life and believing in plural marriage with a conviction so strong she willingly opened her heart to share her husband with others. Not through coercion, but through faith, not through deception, but through choice. And that choice, though rooted in sincerity, came to cost her more than she could ever have imagined. For Mary was there when Janelle joined. She was there when Christine entered the fold. And she was there most painfully when she legally divorced Kody so that he could marry Robin and adopt her children, sacrificing her own position with a loyalty so unreciprocated it would later echo like betrayal. And though she obeyed, waited, and endured, Kody never truly returned to her. The distance between them grew over decades, seated in heartbreak when Mary struggled with infertility, managing to have only one child, Leon, while the other wives each bore 6, and in a family where motherhood seemed like the currency of worth, Mary felt her value diminish, while jealousy, misunderstandings, and emotional absences chipped away at what once seemed unbreakable, leaving her not only estranged from Kody, but often isolated from her sister wives, her loneliness hidden behind polite smiles and family portraits that viewers could see through, because behind the surface, there was pain. And then came the breaking point in 2015, the infamous catfishing scandal, when Mary, starved of attention and longing for validation, was lured into what she believed was an online relationship with a kind, compassionate man, only to discover she had been deceived by a woman posing as someone else, leaving her not only humiliated and heartbroken, but punished by Kody's coldness. For instead of compassion, he offered only blame, choosing to see betrayal rather than desperation, shutting down the marriage completely and declaring first in public confessionals rather than to her face that there was no spark, no safety, no romantic connection left, reducing 3 decades of partnership to a friendship at best and an inconvenience at worst. Mary's eyes told the story the words could barely contain as she begged for therapy, for reconnection, for even the smallest gesture of care, but Kody refused, stating again and again that he no longer considered himself married to her, a revelation made to millions of viewers before it was even made directly to her. And so Mary's existence in the family home became one of quiet erasure, left out of decisions, disregarded in conversations, even dismissed outright in one infamous moment. When Kody asked her coldly, "Why are you here?" A line that cut deeper than any argument, crystallizing for both Meri and the audience that she had long ceased to matter in his eyes. And while Christine and Janelle eventually left in pursuit of freedom, Meri lingered, clinging to a hope that perhaps the silence meant something more than abandonment, until at last, with heartbreaking dignity, she admitted in her own confessional that she had spent years trying to repair something the other person wasn't even invested in. That she had held on far too long, and finally she walked away, not with fireworks, not with fury, but with quiet strength, publicly confirming her separation and declaring that she was done begging for crumbs, that she was reclaiming her life, her independence, and her identity. And since then, she has begun to live anew, launching her own business, traveling, smiling not with forced bravado but with genuine lightness, reconciling with her child, Leon, embracing their identity and pronouns with pride, and stepping into her own truth after years of being silenced. Her journey has shown that sometimes the bravest act is not leaving in anger but leaving in peace, choosing oneself after decades of neglect. And though her farewell was subdued, it carried the kind of strength that reshapes narratives. Because to release someone who abandoned you long ago requires a courage few possess. And her story, like Christine's and Janelle's, is part of the greater collapse of what was once held up as the modern face of plural marriage. The Brown family, once celebrated as pioneers of unity, love, and faith, now stand as a fragmented legacy of what happens when pride replaces compassion and control replaces partnership, with Kody left bitter and bewildered, blaming wives and and children who simply craved equality and affection, while fans, children, and even mental health experts now see what so many suspected all along, that his charisma was hollow, leadership flawed, and his love unequally given, leaving behind not a thriving family empire, but silence, estrangement, and a barren dream, symbolized by the still empty land at Coyote Pass. A plot once envisioned as their eternal legacy, but now nothing more than a monument to what could have been. And today, Christine is thriving in remarriage. Janelle is building stability for herself. Meri is healing and rediscovering strength. The children are forging their own paths, and Kody sits with only Robin, the so-called favorite, who herself admits that this isn't the life she signed up for. For she dreamed of a vast plural family and found instead a hollow echo of one, a man consumed by anger and regret. And so the story that began as a bold testament to faith and unity has ended as a cautionary tale. A lesson in what happens when the ideals of love are corrupted